Hi and welcome to this video. In this one, we're going to build a CLI application using Node.js, which is called Stories. So this is going to be a CLI application, but we're going to give it a front end as well. But for now, let's just talk about what this app contains. So this is going to have a small JSON database in which we can store stories. We could create a new story and provide it with different tags so we can distinguish between them. We can also take a look at when the stories were created. We can filter the stories based on their IDs. We can delete a story based on their ID, and we can get all of the stories. We can also remove all of them. So let's take a look at these commands. So the first thing that I'm going to show you is how you can create a new story. So for that, we're gonna grab our story CLI CLI, and then the new is going to be our command. And after that, we need to provide a name for our story. The name of the story could be anything. So I'm just going to say this is a new story for demo. There we go. We could give it some tags. Let's say tags. This could be demo and whatever else tag you want to, let's say work. And now as soon as I hit enter, this is going to give me this message. It's going to say story has been added right here. So that's the first thing that's going to say. And then it's going to show me something that looks like a JavaScript object. We have the tags right here inside of an array. So we're going to store it inside an array, and I'm going to show you how we can manage that. We have the content for that specific story, and then we have the ID for the story. Now the ID for every individual story is going to be different because this ID is basically going to be when the story was created. So it's going to be the date, it's going to be a date object that we're going to store as an ID. So this is the story that I created. I could delete the story based on its ID, but before deleting it, I want to show you all of the stories that I've created beforehand for demonstration purpose only. So I'm going to say story CLI, and as soon as I do all and hit enter, this is going to show me all of the stories that I've already created. So let's go to the top. In here, this is the first story, so I created it on this date, and this is the ID for that. And here is the content of the story for it. This is the second one, so we can see all of these stories, all of them, they have their specific tags. Now, if you're looking for a specific story, this is how it's going to be shown to you. But once you generate a new story, it's going to be shown in a programmatic way. But if you are retrieving stories, this is how it's going to be shown to you. And where is our story? Our story is right here. So it's going to be the last one. Demo, work. This is a new story for demo. Now, how can we retrieve a single story? We could say story. Now, it's always going to be our CLI, which is story CLI. You could name this whatever you want, and I'm going to say find. Now, what do you want to find? Let's say I want to take a look at this. So I'm going to copy the ID, come right here, pass in the ID, and I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to give me that specific story. So far I talked about creating a new story, retrieving all of the stories from our database, and then retrieving one story. Now, what if you want to delete a specific story? Let's say this last one that I created, I want to delete it. So I'm going to copy its ID. I'm going to grab my command line, which is story CLI. This is going to be my CLI. And then there is going to be a command that's going to be remove. And then I'm going to pass in the ID. I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to say story removed. Now, if I were to say story CLI all, and if I take a look at my last entry, we can see we no longer have that demo story that I created. Now, we could delete all of the stories. So for that, I'm going to say story CLI, and I'm going to say clean, and that's going to basically clean the entire database. Now, before doing that, I need to show you how this actually works in the context of creating or generating server-side HTML, because everything that we do inside of our terminal right here and everything that we do inside of Node.js, that's our backend. That's our server. That's not the front end. That's the backend. And I want to show you by the end of this video, I want to show you how you can send some HTML from your backend, which is Node.js, to your frontend, which is your browser. So here we are within our backend, and I want to send some HTML to my frontend. So for that, I'm going to grab my CLI, which is Storytelly, and the command is going to be web. And as soon as you hit enter, this is going to launch a local host with a port of that, with a predefined port. And it's going to basically show all of the stories here as well. Now, all of this comes from the server, but I've already applied some styles on it inside of our HTML using plain CSS, no tailwind. And the reason that I apply styles was so it is decent enough for us to take a look at. And of course, much like any other project of mine, this is going to be fully responsive. Now, I wanted to add the date created here as well, but I said, okay, that's something that you could add it if you want, and I'm going to show you how you can add that. But this is all of the stories that we have. So we have the content for a specific story. The stories don't have titles. They just have content and they have tags. You could come up with some feature by adding a title in there. It's going to be extremely simple. You're going to ask the user to give me a title as well, and then, or you could select one of the tags and you could make it a title, or you could grab the first few characters or the first few words, and that could be a title. So that's something that I'm going to let you implement, but this is what I'm going to implement by the end of this video. So let's dive in. I'm going to keep this just minimized down here. We're going to get started from absolute basics, but before starting, let's close this port. I'm going to close this and I'm going to keep this open. This is going to refer to the completed CLI app. So I'm just going to keep it right here just in case I want to show you some functionality. Let's go ahead and let's open up our VS Code right here. And since we're starting from scratch, there is nothing within this VS Code within this folder. In this video, I actually assume no prior knowledge of Node.js, but I do assume that you have some basic or intermediate level knowledge of JavaScript. The more you're familiar with JavaScript, the better this experience going through this video is going to be for you. So Node.js is actually a JavaScript runtime environment. And what does that mean? Now, JavaScript has several different environments to run in. The famous environment that JavaScript runs in is the browser. So we create web applications and we show it in the browser. We do that using React, we do that using other frameworks, but that's where JavaScript shines and that's where JavaScript was initially intended to work in. But for a long time, JavaScript has been able to work in the backend as well as for some other purposes that I'm not going to talk about in this video. So Node.js is basically an environment in which we are going to use still JavaScript. The APIs, the methods, the functions, they're going to be different, but their syntax is going to be JavaScript. All right. And Node.js is going to help us implement JavaScript or use JavaScript on the backend, on the other side of the front end. So that's what it means by Node.js being an environment, a runtime environment. Now, Node.js on its own, it's not a programming language. It's just a tool that helps us use JavaScript to create servers, to work with servers, and to send some HTML from a server to our front end, which is the browser. Now, that's what Node.js is. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, understanding Node.js is going to be a lot simpler. But keep in mind that we're not going to use the methods and the functions and the APIs that we use with the browser, because Node.js is a different environment, so it accesses different features and different capabilities of JavaScript. The capabilities and the features that work on the server, not that they work on the front end. So there are going to be some similarities, as you can see right here. The first similarity is this console log. So we use this console log a lot. So that's available for us on the backend as well as on the front end. But what is this res? What is this end? What is this create server? All of this, that's backend. We don't use it in front end. Like this node HTTP, this object that Node gives us that we can create a server, we can send some response back. We're actually going to take a look at this because in this video, I don't want to sugarcoat Node.js. I want to show you how Node.js works and how Node.js works without any framework. So think of this like a pure vanilla Node.js video where we just talk about Node.js and JavaScript. There is not going to be any Express or any other backend framework that is going to help us build our application better or faster or cleaner. We're just going to go the old school way so you really understand what Node.js is and how it works. So if you don't have it installed, you can just go to nodejs.org, or you can just simply Google Node.js and you're going to come to this website. It's going to determine your OS, but if it doesn't, you can just always come to download and download for your specific OS from here. My suggestion for you is to install the LTS, the long-term support version. This is going to be the one that doesn't have any, the version that doesn't have any bugs. So you don't like end up scratching your head over something that you don't have any control over of. So now that you have installed, just go ahead, pause the video. If you don't have Node.js, just go ahead and install it. And that is going to automatically come into your VS Code. You could just restart your VS Code just to make sure that Node.js has been installed. Now, if I create a new terminal right here, this is going to be a new terminal for me. And the folder name is going to be Storyfy. Now, I've already selected the Storytelly CLI because this is the app that we're building together. This is going to be called Storyfy. And this basically means that whenever we want to run a command, the CLI is going to be Storyfy. So here you can just do node hyphen version, and this is going to give you the version. If it doesn't do anything, it means you haven't installed it properly. You can also take a look at the npm version, which is the Node Package Manager, which allows us to download packages and install them so we can have a smoother development process. I'm going to show you what this npm actually is used for. So if you do that, you can see our npm version is 10.9. Let's clear everything here. Now, the first thing that I'm going to talk about here is just Node.js on its own, because I want to give you some Node.js knowledge. And in here, I'm going to create a file. The file name doesn't really matter, but because I want to show that this is on the server, not on the front end, I'm just going to call it server.js, or I could just call it node.js, and it's going to work fine. Now in here, I could write simple JavaScript. I could say console log hello, our mandatory hello world. I'm going to say from Node.js. I'm going to save this, come into the console or terminal, and in here, the only thing I need to do is I need to say node and then the name of the file. I should have probably named this different. It's something different. So let's say server, so it's not confusing. So in here, I could say server, or I could say server.js. I'm just going to say server.js. Let's run it, and there we go. We got hello world from Node.js. Now, this is a Node.js code, as well as like a code that we use in the front end. And that's one of the similarities that this environment of JavaScript has with the browser environment. But keep in mind, the browser stuff are not going to work in here. Now, the thing that we are very, very much interested in learning about Node.js is something called the process object. The process object is a global object that provides information about the current Node.js process. It gives us the ability to control it, to understand its information. We can also get some command line arguments from there. The reason that we use process is because, as you saw in our completed app, we give something to the terminal, right? When we created our first story. Remember, I gave something to my terminal. I gave it some data, and then it used that data. It stored it somewhere. It doesn't really matter where, but it used that data, and it gave me something that looks like this. So I gave it, this is a story, this is a new story for demo, and it gave me content, this is a new story for demo. It's the same thing that I gave it. And I gave it 2 tags inside a quote. It gave me 2 tags as array items inside of an array, as strings. And it gave me something that I didn't give it. It gave me an ID as well. Now, this is really interesting, but the way that this works is we have something inside of our terminal that we give it, and then terminal does something for us, our CLI app does something for us, and it gives us something based on what we gave it. Now, it's very important for us to be able to give it something in the first place. If we don't provide the content and the tags, it's not going to be able to create that story for us. So that's why we're interested in the process object. So the process object gives us this ability to provide some input to our terminal and to get some output from our terminal. All right. Now you can always read about process more. So if you just come right here, you say process, and there we go. Let's just hit enter, and there we go. You can see the process object provides information about and control over the current Node.js process. There is a ton of information right here about this process. This is actually an object that we can import. Well, you don't need to import it because right here, because this is globally available for us. This is something that is globally available, like console log. You don't need to import log. It is always available on the console. And for this, you don't have to import it because it's available. But there is a lot of information right here. But the one that we are interested in when it comes to putting something in the terminal and getting something out from the terminal is going to be, okay, not there. Let me just go to the top. Let's take a look at this. There we go. It's process ARGV. The ARGV stands for, the arg part stands for argument, and the V stands for vector. And vector in programming is a term that we use to associate with an array or a list. In this scenario, it's going to be an array. And this is very important for us. So let's take a look at process.argv. So argument vector. That means we're going to get an array of arguments. Let's save this. I'm going to run our file one more time. And there we go. This is what we get. We get 2 things in here. And what do you think these 2 things are? You can pause the video, think about them, or you can just continue watching. So the first thing, whoops, this is too thick. So the first thing is actually the path where we have installed Node.js. This is the path to the Node.js executable. This is at the index of 0. You know that arrays are items, or arrays are 0-based indices. So the first one has an index of 0. And the second one right here, this is the file that we're running. Take a look at this. This is server.js. So the first one talks about where Node.js has been installed. And the second one is the current JavaScript file that is being executed. But these 2 are not that interesting. What is interesting? Take a look at this. So I'm running this file again, and I'm going to pass in, I'm going to say relax, and then I'm going to pass in 4, 5, 6, 2 things. And I'm going to hit enter and take a look at that. I give it 2 things out of nowhere. I said relax, and I said 4, 5, 6. And what does it give me? There we go. It got the argument that I gave it, and it put it inside of the array, and it got the second one, and it put it as the second argument. So this is how we're going to build this CLI, and that's why I'm going over this. Now, don't worry, we're going to take a look at some examples so you really understand what it is that we're trying to do. So this was the first way of actually working with this process.argv. Now keep in mind, we are logging everything. That's why we get something back. If we weren't logging, we wouldn't get anything back. We log process.argv. It gives us an array. In case you're getting confused by this, it's completely natural. Process.argv gives us an array. And if you append anything after this name of the file, it's going to put it within that array. Why do we need it? Because when we create our application, we put something here, and then we put something here, and we expect that to be within our object. We create an object, but that's going to be an array. Our database is actually a big array that has a lot of objects inside of it. I'm going to show you the database later, not now. All right. So we're not really interested in the first two. In these two, we're not interested. I don't care where Node.js was installed, and I don't care which file it is that I'm running. So I'm only interested in the part where we actually get something from the user. That's what I'm interested in. So one way for us to go about this is as follows: to get only the things that the user has provided. This is not going to be the way that we actually create our application, but this could be one way that you go about this. So I'm going to create a variable. Now, since you're familiar with JavaScript, I'm not going to explain what a variable is and why we need it. And this is going to be user args, the arguments that the user provides. We know that they are available on something that's called the process object. On there, we have this argument vector or an array of argument, and then we can slice it to skip the first two elements. So I'm going to say slice 2, and this is going to skip the first two elements or the first two items of this array, and it's going to give me all the remaining ones. So in here, I could just say log user arguments. I could just log something different here as well. I could say user provided arguments. We call it arguments because it's something that the user provides, and we select it, we do something with it. All right. Now, an argument is something that you pass to a function. Function accepts that in the form of a parameter of that function and calculates it for you and does something based on that. So that's why it's called arguments. It's not confusing. It's a very simple name. So let's save that and let's clear the terminal. Now I'm running this file again, but I'm just going to get rid of this JS part. So the server, the name of the file is enough for us. Now, in the first scenario, I'm not going to pass in anything. I'm just going to say node server, and I'm going to run it. And we can see the array is empty. Why? Because we skipped the first two items of the array, which was the node executable and the current file executable, but we didn't give it any, as a user, we didn't give it anything. So if I were to run this thing again, I would say item 1, and then I can say item 2. And as soon as I hit enter, this is going to give me an array that has 2 items. Now you know how this works. Let me show you another example as well. And in this example, we could create a simple calculator. But before creating that, we need to think about what the structure of the input that the user provides is going to look like. How is that structure going to be created? So you can go about this any way you want. The way that I'm going to go about this is we're going to have our node. Now, node in this scenario is a CLI. So when I say node, it's the same thing as I said, storytelling. That's a CLI. Now, what comes after the CLI is the command that the CLI runs. The command could be the name of the file in this scenario. So it's going to be server. And then, so I'm running this. I could call this calculation or calculator, but I'm just going to keep it as server. Now, we want to pass one number. That's going to be something like this. Let's say 5. And then since this is a calculator, we want to be able to pass in some sort of an operator. And then after the operator, there is going to be another number. And then we hit enter. So this is one way to go about this. I want to keep it simple because this is not the main focus of this app, but I want to get you up and running with Node.js and the process object, the arguments, because we're going to work with them a lot and I don't want you to be confused as we're going through that. That's why I'm going to do this. All right. If you don't want to go about this, there are chapters for this video. You can skip to where the actual app starts. This is for beginners, so I need to cover all of this stuff. Now, this is the structure that we want to go about. So we have the name of our CLI, we have the name of the command, which is server, and then we do something. We have one argument, a second one, which is the operator, and a third one. So technically, we have 3 arguments after the server. Now, above in here, we had 2 arguments. We had one item, item 1, and then we have another item, item 2. In here, we have 3. I'm just reiterating, this is 1. The operator is 2, and this is number 3. So what is the type of these? So we have the first argument is of type number. The second one could be only one of 4. So it could be, since this is a simple calculator, it could be either the plus sign, the minus sign, this division sign, or the asterisk, which stands for multiplication. So it could be one of the 4, but the numbers could be anything. We are going to have one edge case for a division where you cannot divide by 0, but aside from that, it could be any number on either side of the operator. So this is how we're going to go about this. I'm going to try to keep it for as long as I can, this right here, so we can go about that. Now, we already know how we can skip the first 2 arguments. Let me just comment this. Creating a simple calculator. Skipping the first 2 arguments of this process.argv array, that's actually a good idea. So we're going to skip the first 2 ones. And I'm just going to call these args. We're skipping the first 2. And after this, what I want to do next is I need to check if I have the correct amount of arguments provided by the user. So the user has, if we want our calculation to go forward, the user has to provide 3 things: one number, one operator, and another number. So the length of this arguments array, it has to be 3. It has to be 3. So I'm going to say if args dot length is not equal to is not equal to 3, then I'm going to throw some errors. I'm going to tell the user, okay, maybe you didn't provide a number, maybe you didn't provide an operator. You need to provide all of that. So I'm going to say the usage is going to be like this. Let me provide this in quotes. So I'm going to say the usage is going to be like this. We're going to have our node server, and then you need to provide one number in here. And then there is going to be an operator. And then there is going to be another number right here. So that's going to be the usage. And then I could give the user another message as well. Let me grab my log. And in here, I could say example. This could be node server. Let's say 5 divided by 3, or we have 5 divided by 1. That's our example. And then, since this is something that we don't want the user to do, we need to throw an error right here. Now, you might be thinking, okay, why do I want to throw an error? Because this is going to be a stream that is going to be running. This process is going to be running. And we need to stop this process, because if this if statement holds true, that means there is some sort of a problem within our calculator operation. And we stop the server just to make sure we can actually solve that problem. And the way we stop this is we have this process.exit method. And this process.exit method, this is going to immediately terminate this current Node.js process if we pass it an exit code of 1. This is going to forcefully terminate it. If we pass in an exit code of 0, that means the process is success. But is it success within this if statement? It's not. It's an error. So we're going to pass in 1. Now that we have implemented that part, let's go ahead and let's take a look at our arguments, the arguments that the user is going to provide, and we need to parse them as well. The first argument, I'm going to call it num1. You could call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it num1, and I want this to be a number. Now, since what we pass into our CLI, that's being converted to a string. See? So whatever I pass in right here, I passed in item -1. I know that's a string, but previously I passed in, it was 1, 2, 3 or 4 by 6, whatever. I could just show it to you right here. So node server, if I do, we don't have that right here. So this is going to throw an error. Let me just show it to you. Let me say, comment those ones out. Let's bring this back and bring these two back, save this. Now, if I pass in 5 and hit enter, you can see 5 is a string. Now, I don't want to have a string. I want to have a number. So I need to parse this to a number. And we could use the parse float method of JavaScript. Now, this is JavaScript, right? All of the manipulation that we do with our code, the if statement, that's JavaScript, right? We are within Node.js, but it looks like JavaScript because JavaScript is the language of Node.js. We have our logs, we have some sort of an object, and we access the properties of that object using the dot notation. It's the same thing that we would do in JavaScript, the same thing. Now, we want to grab our arguments, but we want to take a look at its first entry. And what is the index of that? The index of that is 0. So the first entry has to be a number. And then which other entry is a number as well? That's the third entry has to be a number as well. What is the index of the third? It's 2 because indices start from 0. And in here, we are going to have our operator. And I'm basically going to assign it its position. That's going to be position 1. So we have 3 variables responsible for the 3 things that we're going to get from the user. All right. Now, once we have something provided to us by the user, if that's a number, we automatically convert it to a string once we get it. But then if we have a string of 5 and we pass it to our parse float, that is going to give us a number. Because we have a number that has quotes, we get rid of the quotes, we're going to end up with a number. But what if the user doesn't provide a number? If the user provides 5 like this, it doesn't matter what I do with it. This is a string. I'm not going to be able to convert it to a number. So I need to come up with that edge case as well. So I'm going to say if is not a number, you can see again, JavaScript. If num1 is not a number, or num2 is not a number, then what do I want to do here? I'm basically going to log console.log, and I'm going to say, please provide valid nums or numbers. Please provide valid numbers. I'm not going to check which one of them was not. I'm just going to say, just please provide valid numbers. And then I need to stop this process. Remember, what was the code? The code is 1. And there we go. And now we need to do our operation. I'm gonna just speed up this process a little bit. This is simple. From this point onwards, it's purely JavaScript. I'm gonna have a result variable that I'm gonna use to hold the result of our operation. You could come up with a series of switch statements, but I'm gonna go with if statements. I'm gonna say if the operator is equal to the plus sign, that means we want to basically add the 2 numbers. So the result is going to be num1 plus num2. That's going to be the result. Else if, let me just get all of that. You know what? I could get all of that and put it right here. Else if the operator is this is the hyphen or the negation, where you're going to say the negative sign or minus sign. I'm looking for the minus sign. And we're going to say, okay, num1 minus num2. Let's say another else if. Let me just copy paste it down below. get rid of this and put it there. If this is a star, that means we want to multiply these two, so we can just pass in a star in here. Let me just copy this, put it right here. And for the fourth one, if this is that /, we want to say, okay, divide by this. But there is going to be an edge case in here. And what is that edge case? Let me just bring this down, because we cannot divide by 0. So if a number is, if num2, if this part is 0, we don't want to divide it. So we need to have another if statement here as well. We're going to say if num2 is actually 0, then we're going to say log cannot divide. I know maybe I don't need this for this specific example, but I just wanted to have like some sort of a decent calculator here. And then we stop the process. And in the process of creating this calculator, you're basically exercising your JavaScript skills as well. And that's it. And finally, for any other thing, that's going to be the any other condition, I'm going to say log. I could say unknown operator. I could say please, because we have already covered all of the other edge cases. Any other case that would mean that the operator is not specified correctly. I could say please use this, or this, or this, or this one. And this is going to be an error as well. So exit, what was the code? Code is 1. And finally, how do we want to show the result to the user? Remember, we had a specific format. We said, okay, it's going to be one number, an operator, and another number. So let's just use that. I'm going to use backticks in here. I'm going to say num1. That's going to be the first one. The second one is going to be our operator. So operator. And after that, we're going to have our num2. And where is our result? The result is right here. We're going to say result. Save that. We don't have any errors. That's a good thing. And let's try to run it. Now keep in mind, we need to run it as we have specified here. So I'm going to say node server 5 divided by 1. It's going to say 5 divided by 1 equals 5. Okay, let's test it. I'm going to say 5 divided by 0. You can see it stopped the process. It gave us an error. And you can see this here, we have this icon. And now we have this warning icon because there was a warning. The process was stopped. And you can see that cross sign here as well. Okay, I can't do that. What if I don't provide all of the arguments? It's going to say usage, node server, number, operator, number. Example is this, because it couldn't find, because the length wasn't equal to 3. Now, if I were to pass in like 4 arguments, this is going to give me the same error. But if I pass in 5 divided by 12, it's going to calculate it for me. So you can see there is something, there is some problem here where we have several decimal points. What we can do is we can say result.toFixed, and we can just pass in 2. And now if I run this again, this is going to give us 0.42. So this is how you can tinker it and make it better. Let's just test the other ones as well. Let's say 41 multiplied by 41. That's going to be it. All right. 0.00. We could say 41 plus 41. That's going to be 82. We could say 41 minus 41. We're going to get 0. And if I say 41 divided by 41, we get 1. And that's it. So this is, I talked about 3 examples. The first example was the process.argv itself. The second one was how to shorten it. And the third one was this calculator. And that is going to be it for the side notes of this video. From this point onwards, what I'm going to try to do is we're just going to stick to our application and we're going to create our application. So I'm going to close this. I am going to, because we're going to end up with a server of ourselves, I'm just going to say calculator. And this was a fun example, right? I really enjoyed creating it. So this is going to be our calculator. I'm not going to delete it. I'm going to put it right here. Now we're going to get started with our real application, with our real CLI. Now, since we are talking about Node.js and we want to create a Node.js project, why do we need a project? Because this project could have some stuff that depend on it, aka project dependencies. We need to install some stuff from the internet. That some of them could be dependencies of the project directly. Some of them could be dependencies that we use only during the development phase, that we write the code and they're going to be called development dependencies. So there is a lot of things that we need to handle. We need to create our CLI, because so far if I say Storyfy and hit enter, you can see it says this is not recognized because we didn't create the CLI. Well, when we use Node, it recognized that because we installed it. So we need to create the CLI from scratch, and then we need to install it as well. To get started creating a new Node project, let's just first clear the terminal. We're going to use the npm, which stands for Node Package Manager. This is going to help us create a new Node project. It's going to help us install some packages if we need them. So we're just going to say npm. This is going to be the CLI. So keep in mind, npm is a CLI. What is a command that the npm CLI is going to run? That's going to be init. I'm going to hit enter. This is going to ask us a bunch of questions. Now, as I said at the start of this video, I'm expecting that you have no prior knowledge of Node.js, and I'm explaining it like that. So here it says this utility will walk you through creating a package.json file. Now, when working in front-end or in back-end, I would say the most important file that you have is the package.json. And it's exactly what the name says. It is a file that contains all of your packages. So what your project depends on, what are the development dependencies, what have you used within your project, and all of the other information that your project has. For example, your project name, the version of the project, the license of the project, all of that, all of the commands for your specific project, they're going to come from package.json. So this is the single most important file in any front-end application or back-end application in the JavaScript ecosystem. Now, the first thing that it asks us is the package name. Is this name okay? So it gives you a name, Storyfy Node CLI App. This comes from the name of the folder. Is this okay? If you agree with any of its answers, you just hit enter and it asks you another question. What is the version? It gives you 1.0.0 by default. If you say, okay, that's the version I don't care, or that's the version that I'm going to use, you just hit enter. You go to the next question that it says description. So here you could write a description. I don't care about description. I'm going to hit enter. Now the entry point, I don't want it to be calculator.js. It's going to be index.js. So let's create this index.js. That's going to be the entry point. The calculator was just an example. You could add a test command, a Git repository. You could add some keywords. You could add the author, the license. And if you say yes, at this point, this is going to give you all of this information. So it's going to give you a name. It's going to give you a version, a main. You can see it looks like a JavaScript object, but it is not. It's actually a JSON. JavaScript, it's something that looks like a JavaScript object, which is what JSON or JSON is. JavaScript object notation. It looks like a JavaScript object. And there we go, the remainder of information. As soon as I hit enter again, this is going to create that package.json file that I've been talking about. So with all of the information right here. Now that we have our package.json, you don't need to worry about the other information. You just need to keep in mind what your main entry point for the app is. Now, if I go back to our Node.js website, as I said that we're not going to use process, we're not going to import it because it's available globally. You don't need to import it. But there is something interesting here. This require method. This is a common JS module pattern. I'm not going to talk about modules because I believe the video is going to go too long. I need to talk about the file system package as well that Node.js gives us, the API, FS API. And there's going to be a lot of time dedicated to that. But then if I talk about modules, it's the same thing that we have in JavaScript. You separate code into different files, and a file becomes a module if you export something from it. If you export anything from a file, that file becomes, it's a module. It doesn't mean it has like superpowers. It just means it's a file as well as a module because it exports something. And then you do this separation of code, you breaking up of code, because code gets, we're going to do some modules here as well, but I'm not going to try to explain it in depth. And again, the reason is going to be so you can handle the code better. You separate the code into different files, so it's just a management kind of thing. That's it. Now here, this is the common JS module pattern. This is the old way of doing it, but I'm going to show you the way that we have been doing it since 2015, the ES6 module pattern. All right, and that's going to be different than this, but since so far, unfortunately, that has not become the main module system of Node.js applications or any application that has a package.json, you need to actually specify the type here. So as soon as I do type, you can see I have two entries. It says common JS is the default, but then we could use the type module because we are not going to use the require. We're going to use some other syntax. If you have worked with React, you have seen something like this. Import something from something. So this is the ES6 module pattern. This is what we're going to use. So we need to provide this flag here. And since I'm trying to create a CLI using called Storyfy, I need to initialize that in here as well. So in here, what I want to do is I want to create a command line script, and I'm able to do it using this bin. So this bin is going to create for us, it's going to define for us a command line script. And this script is basically going to say that I have this Storyfy thing. I have this Storyfy. Now, keep in mind, once you are within JSON, the keys of the object as well as the values, both of them have to be in quotes. So there we go. Now, this is my CLI, and this CLI has to map to a file. What is our entry point for this application? It is the index.js file, and that's it. So we created our CLI. Let me add a comma there, and then we need to install it, and then we need to link it as well. And what this basically means that whenever we run Storyfy within our terminal, it's going to trace it back. It's going to basically map it to our index.js, where index.js is the main entry point of our CLI application. It's all going to make sense as we get started and doing this more and more. It's the same thing as this. So once I said story telly, this CLI was mapped to the index.js of the completed app that I showed you. And we're basically retracing our steps here. So now that I've defined this, what I need to do is I need to install this. So we're going to say npm install -g. This is going to install it globally for us. And then we need to link it as well. But before linking this, let me get rid of this. There is something that's called a shebang. And this shebang is this one. Now, since I'm on a Windows machine, I don't need to actually provide it here, but it's a good idea if I do. But if you're on Linux or Mac, you need to provide this. And the idea behind this is we basically want to specify the interpreter as a node when we are running our CLI inside of the terminal. That's what we basically want to do. And now in here, I'm going to say log process. This is just a test, so we know that everything is working perfectly fine. I'm going to save this. So I installed that. I need to link my CLI. And the reason behind it is because I want to be able to use it globally. Now you can see I just opened up that folder in the PowerShell and I'm able to use my CLI globally. I can use it here, and then I want to be able to use it here as well. So I'm going to say npm link, and there we go. It just linked that for us. And now to be able to test this, we're going to say, what is the name of our CLI? It is Storyfy. And then when I run Storyfy, it's going to take a look at my index.js file, and it's going to run that for me. So I'm going to hit enter, and there we go. Congratulations, you just created your very first command line interface, much like Node. So you could call yourself a publisher now. You created a package. Not a package, you created a CLI, right? Now, how is this helpful? Because when I say Storyfy, when I said that previously, like a while ago, I got an error because it wasn't defined. Now, not only it is defined now, but it is actually mapping itself to this index.js where we have this process.argv. Now, if I were to say item 1, item 2, hit enter, see, we have the same thing. We have the same kind of result that we were able to use to create our calculator. Now that we have created the Storyfy CLI and we have been able to map it back to our index.js, you can see this process is a little bit tedious. It's a little bit difficult for us to go back and forth and to be able to actually get something from the user and sift through it and remove the first two items and maybe like store it in some sort of a database for us. So at this point, what I would like to do is I would like to introduce you to a library that is going to help us streamline this process a little bit better. So here I have opened up this page. This is yargs package. And this basically what we use it is if we want to create some sort of a CLI application and we want to work with it in a more productive way, we are going to use this library. So what this library is going to do, as it says, is yargs helps us build interactive command line tools by parsing arguments and generating an elegant user interface. Why do we need it? Because it's a little bit difficult if we just work with the current native Node.js methods. We need to go back and forth a lot. And one of the major issues that we face so far is going to be the first two elements that we have right here. So one is the node executable. The other one is where this file exists. We don't need these two. So we need to access this arguments array or this arguments vector, but we don't need these two items. So we need to have a little bit of a more smoother interface for our CLI. And that's why we're going to use this package. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this. It says npm yargs. That's going to be how we can install this. And I'm going to come right here and I'm just going to paste that and I'm going to hit enter. We can jump into our package.json file. And in here, there is going to be, there we go, another entry that says dependencies. Now you need to pay attention to this dependencies because this dependencies, this is going to go from the current phase that is development of the CLI or writing the code for the CLI so the CLI works, and then it goes from this phase to the production. So dependencies are going to be all of the packages and the libraries that we install that are going to help us write the code faster and smoother, and the experience is going to be so much better. I mean, you don't need this, but if you use it, this is going to make your job a lot easier. So this is going to be a dependency, but this is not a development dependency because it doesn't say so. So it's going to go from development to production. That's the first thing that you need to notice. The second thing that you need to notice is that now we seem to have another file that says package.json, package-lock.json. Now, here we have installed this yargs. It has a specific version. Now, this package lock is very, very important because it locks in that specific feature for that specific library or package that you have installed. And why is that important? It's important because we are using this specific version of this package to create our CLI. I mean, if the version gets newer or it gets updated, our CLI might not work. Some methods might change their behavior. So that's why this package lock is very, very important, because it locks that specific version of that library that we have installed. That's the second thing. The third thing is now we have this folder. It says node_modules. Now this folder, this is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger the more libraries that you're going to install. And the reason that we installed one library and then it got a lot more for us is because there are some packages that this library depend on, and in turn there are some other packages that depend on those packages. That's why there's just a ton of them here. You don't need, for the most part, do not touch this folder and do not commit it to your GitHub. So if you go to your GitHub, or if I just go ahead and open up my GitHub right here, and if I just come to my profile, let's zoom this in. Let's see, let's say I select a specific project for React. Let's take a look at this one. So this project, even though this is a front-end project, you can see it has its package.json file, and here it details all of the dependencies that we have used that are going to be basically migrated to production as well. But then all of the development dependencies are right here that are not going to go to production. We are just using these to write our application. We are not going to use them in production because they're going to get compiled away or transpiled away to something that the browser can understand. One of the examples of this, two examples that are really clear, are Tailwind and TypeScript. So browser doesn't understand Tailwind and browser doesn't understand TypeScript. So they're going to either compiled away or transpiled away to pure CSS and JavaScript so the browsers can understand it. So that's one important part. The second part is this package lock. So if you take a look at your package lock, this is going to lock in all of the specific versions of all of the either development dependencies or our production dependencies or just simple project dependencies in here. And you can see we commit these two to GitHub, but we never commit node modules because this is a big folder. That's reason number one. Reason number two is, if you take a look at these, there is just a ton of other stuff that you as the author of the CLI have not written. I mean, why would you commit something to your GitHub, some kind of a code that you have not written yourself? I mean, you don't need this. So you can just send the package.json and package lock, and anyone who downloads your code, for example, if you go to the to the README of this application, if you just come right here, you can say download zip. You're going to get the zip. And after you got that, the only thing you need to do is open it up with VS Code and then say npm install, and it's going to install all of the dependencies. So it's easier this way if we don't just commit the node modules. And this is the process that we're going to go about this. All right, so now that you know all of this, let's just put this on the side and let's keep moving forward. So what I'm going to do at first is I'm going to get rid of this process.argv. And what we're going to do is we need to import our yargs from the yargs library. And that's going to basically import it for us. The way you can convert this is first get rid of the const and replace that with import. Get rid of this equality sign as well as the require, as well as the parentheses for the require. And you say import yargs, and then after that, instead of require, you're going to say from yargs. And that should be it. So we have yargs, and on yargs we have some method that is called hide bin. And the idea behind this method is to basically hide the first two arguments, the first two items that we get right here. It's basically going to hide that for us. And because we don't really need these two, we just care about the input of the user. So in here, I'm going to pass in our process.argv. And on this, we have something that's called a script name. What is our script name? It is Storyfy. And on the script name, let me just hit enter so this is readable. On the script name, we have something that's called a command. So we have a CLI, that's Storyfy, that we've been using so far. And then we have a command in here as well. Now, what I'm trying to recreate here is the boilerplate code that this library gives us to get started. So if you come to the actual website of this library, if you just come down here, there is the installation, there is the usage. We're not going to worry about that. Let's take a look. So this is Dino, this is ESM, there we go. So here we have import yargs from yarg, import hide bin. What we could do is we could basically just copy paste this, or I can just go over this so you really understand what is happening here. All right, so we have a script name, we have a command. Now, so far, you know what a command is. You have npm, which is a CLI, install is a command, or short I. So we said npm I yargs. I is the command. What is going to be our command? For starters, our command, let me just hit enter. It's going to be curl, and we're going to pass in these basically angle brackets. And these angle brackets basically mean that whatever we pass in here, we need to provide something for it. And I'm just going to pass in a URL as I'm trying to recreate the boilerplate code. Now that's going to be we know what our CLI is, and curl is going to be our command. But then you might want to provide a little bit of information for this command, and that's going to be right here. So you could say fetch the contents of the URL. After providing a short description for the command, we could add some other function that's actually called a builder function. And here is the signature for the builder function. Now, this is going to be an empty builder function because I don't want to provide more information or more options for my command, but I want this function to exist so you can actually see that. If you want to provide more information for your command, this is where you're going to add it here, or more options for your command, but I'm just going to add it as an empty function. Now, once we run this command, what do we want to happen? That's going to be the job of this other function that's called the handler function. Now, once we run this function, what do we want to do? We want to grab our argv and we want to basically log it to the console. So let's go ahead and do that. Console dot, I'm going to use our info in this scenario, info method, and I'm going to pass in argv. Let's save this. Now, before running this, we need to have a couple of more methods here as well. The first method that we need here is called .demand command, and I'm going to pass in 1. Why do I pass in 1? Because there has to be at least one command. And what is that command? That's our curl command. So we are demanding from the user that the user should provide a minimum of one command. And if the user runs the script with no commands, yargs is going to show an error and it's going to show a help message as well. And then the second method that I'm going to add onto this, let me just hit enter so this is more readable. And the second method that I'm going to add on here, that's called parse. And the job of this method is to tell yargs to start parsing our process.argv. Now, without this parse, yargs is not going to do anything. And the idea behind these two methods is that the demand command, it is going to prevent running the script without a command. And basically that's for our input validation. and the parse is going to trigger execution. So without that, this entire command is not going to run. Let's save everything. Let's come right here. So let me clear this. So after clearing, let's take a look at our code. Oh, I need to import hide bin. So I'm going to say import this method. This is going to be imported from yargs /helpers. Let's save that. And now, how is this going to run? So we have our Storyfy, and then what is the command? The command is curl. And then this command requires a URL. Let's say www.arnacode.com. If you have not subscribed to my newsletter, you can just go to this website and subscribe to it. So we have this arnacode.com, and as soon as I hit enter, we get something beautiful. And in here, we have our curl command, we have our CLI, and then we have our URL. So we have been able to successfully use the yargs library to get something from the user. So from this point onwards, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work on a little bit of our project structure, and then I'm going to try to create our database, and so we can actually get started with creating our stories. So the way that I'm going to go about this is I'm going to keep this index.js file. And the only thing that this index.js file is going to do is this is going to run our commands. This is not going to contain our commands, but this is just going to run them. So I'm going to grab all of this and I'm going to comment them out. All right. And let's save this file. In here, in our directory, I'm going to create a new folder that's going to be called source. Within the source, I'm going to create a new file that's going to be command. Now here, I'm trying to separate different logic apart so it's easier for us to navigate our project. If there is any problems, we can distinguish that better. And if you want to test any part of the functionality of your CLI, that's going to be easier to do as well. Now here, the only thing that I want to do for this, not this command.js, but for our index.js is to run our command.js file. So in here, I'm going to say, jump into the source directory, and from there, just get the command.js file. Now, we're not importing specific things from this file. We want to run this file. That's why we import it like this. So it's not like I'm selecting a specific command. I want to be able to run all of the commands if I want to. So I'm just going to select the file, and then this is going to help me basically be able to implement any of the commands that I want. Now, this index.js file, this is going to be done for us for now. I'm just going to close that. I'm going to close our package.json. Now, within our commands, I'm not going to create anything so far because I want to talk about the folder structure of our project. Within the source, I'm going to create a new file that's going to be database.js. Now, the job of this file is going to be, it has a weird name. Let me just change it to db.js. It looks a little bit weird. Now, the job of this file is to separate our database logic. Now, whenever you're working with databases in your applications, you need some sort of, it's called an abstraction layer. It's something that simplifies interacting with your database. Now, because our main focus is our CLI, not the actual interaction, involving or concerning ourselves with the actual implementation of the database, that's why I'm putting database logic in a separate file. All right. Now that this is done, I'm going to create a new file, and that's going to basically be called stories.js. Now, this stories.js file, this is going to be able to handle our story logic because we want to create a story. We want to remove it. We want to maybe retrieve all of the stories or delete all of the stories. And all of that logic is going to be right here. And from this file, we are going to get the functions into our command.js. But this stories.js is going to be the file that's going to be interacting with our ORM, and our ORM is going to handle our data persistence. Now, there are going to be a couple more files here as well, because at the end of our project, we want to have a web version of the project as well. So I could just create the files even though we're not going to use them now. This is going to be our server that's going to serve the server-side HTML. And then we need to have some sort of an HTML file here as well to be able to show those to the users. And that's going to be our template.html. So for now, I'm just going to close the server.js as well as the template.html. We just want to get this CLI working inside of our terminal. And once it's done, we're going to jump into creating a server and actually sending the HTML that we create on the server to our front end, to a front end, whatever front end that could be. So let's just jump in and let's start creating our database abstractions first, because that's very, very important for us. Now, what is our database in here? I didn't actually create the database. Now, inside of the main directory, right next to my index.js, I'm going to create a db.json file. And this db.json file, this is going to have an object. Now, keep in mind, this is a JSON, so the syntax should look like a JSON. And that's basically the name of the key, or the key as well as the values. They should be in quotes if they're strings. So we have an object that's called stories, and then that's going to have an array as values. And all of our stories that we create, they're going to be objects as array items. And that's it. So this is our database. Now, try to not make any changes to here, because you don't want to actually directly manipulate your database, remove rows, remove basically some entries. You want to have some kind of a logic for that. And that's where our stories.js is going to come to the picture. Now, first of all, we're going to jump into our db.js, and I'm going to try to explain it as simple as possible. But this is going to be our database abstractions. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to get a path to my database. And I'm going to say db_path. Where is my database? Now, for us to be able to get the path for this database, we need to have a absolute path as opposed to a relative path, because we want our application to work on other platforms as well, not just this one. So we need to have some sort of an absolute path. Now, if we were using common JS modules, we would use something like dir name, and that would give us the absolute path to where our file is located. But unfortunately, dir name ___ dir name or file name, they do not exist in ES modules. So we need to come up with some other method. So here we have a method that's going to be called new URL. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to actually get the path to my database.json, and we need to import it, but what this eventually is going to give us is going to be a URL. So it's going to be import.meta.url. Now, this is a URL, but Node.js requires files. It doesn't work with URLs. We need a file. So we need to convert this from a URL to a file. And that's why I'm going to surround this by something that's called file URL to path. And there we go. So this is basically going to give us an absolute path, which is not a URL, to our database. Now, this is the way that we are going to go about this because we're using ES6 modules. Now that we have created our DB path, let's talk about the methods that we want to create that are going to interact directly with our db.json file. So the first method that I'm going to create is going to be getDB. This is going to get our database for us. And this is called a data layer abstraction. And this is going to be an async function. I'm going to come back to this, why this is an async operation. So what we want to do here is we want to get our database. We have already selected a path. We have already basically imported our database into this db.js, and it is stored within our db_path. But keep in mind, db.json, that's JSON. If we want to read from JSON, we need to parse that JSON, right? And in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say await fs, Now, FS is another native package that is globally available to us, that is made globally available to us using Node.js, and it is short for file system. It's very important. Now, if you have worked with Vite, that we use to basically initialize new React projects or front-end projects, that Vite tool that uses this FS under the hood. Because this FS module, this is the module that we use if we want to create a folder using our terminal, if you want to create a file using our terminal. So if you do something, if you do npm, remember we did npm init that created a new file for us that was packaged as JSON, that basically used this FS. So this module, this is very, very powerful, and we use it to either create a file, read from a file, write to a file, delete a file, anything you want to do with anything you can do with your mouse to your files in your system, in your machine, or in your computer, you can do with this FS module. And it is globally available to us by Node.js. Now, we want to go to our database and read from it. So there is a method that's called, let me say FS, and that method is called read file. Now, we want to do this asynchronously, and I'm going to come back to it. Why do we want to do that? So where is the path? It's db path. And what is the character encoding? It's UTF-8. It's the same character encoding that we use for our HTML pages. The reason behind this character encoding is so we can read it as humans. We want to parse it into some method that we can actually read it. And I'm going to store this retrieval of the database inside of this variable, and I'm going to initialize that as well. Now, what do I want to return from this getDB function? Asynchronous function is, I'm going to select my JSON.parse. You know from your knowledge of JavaScript that if you want to convert JSON to JavaScript, you're going to use JSON.parse, and I'm going to pass in my DB. So why is this asynchronous? As I said, I'm going to come back to it, and now I want to talk about it. Now, the reason that this is asynchronous is because we want this to be asynchronous. We don't want it to be blocking. We don't want it to be synchronous, because when we're reading from files, it's going to take some time. And until that time is elapsed, if this is synchronous, our application is going to freeze. Now, we want that process of reading the file to run in the background while we're running other lines of code within our application. That's why we want it to be asynchronous, or we want it to be non-blocking, right? Now, we need to import a couple of things before moving forward. The first thing is our FS module. We did not actually import it, so I'm going to say import FS. Now, we want to take a look at FS in the context of asynchronous programming. So we need to import it from node FS. Let me just surround it with quotes, from promises, because this is going to be asynchronous as I talked about it. And we need to import our file URL to path method as well. And that's going to be file URL to path from node URL. File URL to path. And as it seems, I've made a typo, so I'm just going to copy that, put it right here, and there we go. Now that we have selected everything from our database, we need to be able to write to our database as well. So that's going to be const. If you want to save something to your database, you could technically call it savedb. And again, this should be non-blocking, so we are going to say async. Now, when you're storing something to your database, you're actually putting something there. So this function should receive something from the user that they write within the terminal. This process is going to be asynchronous. We're going to grab our FS module, and now there is another method that's called write file. Now we want to do this asynchronously. That's why we're going to say fs.write file. What do we want to write to? It's our database that we have selected. Now, before writing to our JSON database, remember the thing that we want to put in there, that's a JavaScript object. So you need to convert it into JSON before putting it inside of your database. And there is a method that's called Stringify that's going to convert a JavaScript object into a JSON string. Now, I'm going to pass in my database here, that whatever that is that the user has written. And this is going to have two more arguments as well. So the second one is called replacer, which controls which properties should be included. I'm just going to say null because usually this is null. We want all the properties to be included. But then again, once we write to our database and we go and take a look at our db.json file, we want it to be readable. So I'm going to add a value of 2 for indentation. And finally, what do we want to return from this? We want to return our db. Let's save this. Now, this is getting, the first method is getting everything from the database. The second one is writing everything into database. But we don't have any specific method to insert one thing into our database. And for that, I'm just going to create another method that's going to be insert. And this is going to be async as well. We're going to receive some data from the user. And then we need to say await because this process should be asynchronous, as I explained before. So let's get our database. Now, whatever I get from there, I'm going to store it within this db variable. And then I'm going to grab this db. And now keep in mind, within the db, we have a stories entry that actually holds an array. And how do you add on to an array without removing the previous entries of the array? You're going to say push. So stories.push, what do you want to push in there? You want to push in there the data that you have received. Now, after that, we need to call our savedb because we need to make sure that the new changes are stored within our database. And we want to return the data to be able to show that to the user as well. Now, all these three methods, I'm going to export them because I want to use them within my stories.js because this is going to be where I'm creating some methods that are going to allow the terminal app or our CLI to actually have the ability to create some stories. So I'm going to click, I shouldn't do it like that. Just click there, hold Alt, click here as well as here. I'm going to say export. Let's save this. Hopefully there is nothing wrong. So let's jump into our stories. What do I want to do in here? Now, within the stories, we want to have a method that's responsible for creating a story from scratch. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to import all three database layer abstractions. One was insert, the other one was getDB, and the other one was savedb. Very good. Now in here, I'm going to say const new story. Of course, this is going to be non-blocking or asynchronous. Now, when we want to create a new story, what are the important information revolving around that story? Well, it's the story itself, and then it's the tags for that specific story that we're going to receive based on whatever the user has written. Now, remember, in here, we said we have this data and we push that data to our stories item or entry of our database. So in here, I'm going to create that const data. How is that going to look like? So for every individual story, we're going to have tags. Okay, we're going to have content. That's going to be the story itself. And then each story is going to have an ID as well. But that ID is very interesting because that ID is when the story was created. Now, we're going to use this ID in two different ways. One way is going to be, we're going to use this is going to be like a big number. We're going to use it to find the specific story. That's the first use case of the ID. And then the second use case of this ID is that we're going to convert it to a readable format so we can see when the story was created. So if I come right here, you can see that right here. We have this date created, right? Which is the same ID. And then we have this ID as well. So if you convert this ID, this number, into a time format that is readable by us, it's going to give you this. So we don't need to create 4 different properties for every individual story. The story has tags, which I just created. It has the story, which is the content. It doesn't have a title. You could add a title if you want to, but then it has the ID, and that's it. And I'm going to use the ID in 2 different ways. Now that we have our data, what do we want to do with this data? We want to insert it into our database. What do we want to insert? We want to insert the newly created data object. And we want to return that as well. So let's save that. Now, what I want to do first is I want to be able to create a story, store it within my database, and show it in the terminal as well. So now that we have created this, let's go ahead and let's create the command for it as well. And once we create the first command, everything is going to click for you. So let's jump right here. Let's import whatever we need here. We know that we're going to need yargs. We're going to import that from yargs. And what else do we want? What else are we going to need? As we saw in our index.js, we're going to need our hide ben method. That's going to be hide ben. We import that from yargs helpers. And basically, we want to import our new story method as well, because we're going to use it to create inside of our command to create a story. So I'm going to say import. Now here I'm doing curly braces because stories.js, it's going to have several different more methods, and I want to import them one by one. So the first one is going to be new story. That's going to come from our stories.js. I could add the JS or not. It doesn't really matter in this scenario. All right, so let's create our command. We already know that we need to get our yargs. If we don't want to take a look at the 2 first arguments, we're going to use the hide ben. Let's pass in our process.argv. And on this, now in our initial attempt, we did a script name here. Now, we don't need to do this because we have already installed this and we have already made sure with using our package.json that the CLI is going to work. So we don't need it anymore. Let me just rearrange these. So I'm going to put my db.js here. I'm going to db.json, put the db.js there, and then we have our command, and then we have our stories. So in here, I'm directly going to do command. Now, command is going to accept several different things. The first thing that's going to accept is going to be, what is the command? The command is going to be new. So whenever you do Storyfy new, that means you're creating a new story. Now, when you're creating a new story, should the story content be necessary? Or should that be required? Yes, that should be required. So we're going to pass in the story content right here. And this basically signifies to our command that we need a positional argument as a requirement. That means the users who use our CLI, they must provide it, otherwise it's not going to work. And then we need to specify the type of this as well. But before moving forward and specifying the type, we could provide some more information for our command. So what is this command going to do? This is going to create a new story. And in just a moment, I'm going to show you where this description of the command is going to be shown. So after this, remember we had 2 functions. So one was a builder function that we used to provide options for our command. And then we had a handler function, the example that I talked about when we set up our yargs. We had a handler function as well that we ran when we actually ran the command inside of our terminal. So here, the builder function is not going to be empty. I'm going to pass in yargs as the parameter for the function. And what do I want to do here? What I want to do here is basically signify to the user that I want to have, that I must have a positional argument called story. I want to provide a description for it, and I want to specify the type of that as well. So it's going to be yargs. Let's just return yargs dot. On the yargs, we have a positional method that's going to specify that we need a positional argument here. That's going to be story. And then what is the type of this? So make sure you're within there. Let's open this up. I'm going to say describe. Now, first, let's add some description. This is going to be the content of the story you want to write. And then what is going to be the type of this? This is going to be f-type string. Now, where can you actually see this information? I'm going to show you that in just a moment. Don't worry about it. So our builder function is done. Let's jump in and let's talk about our handler function. That's going to be async, remember? So this is going to be async because we want it to be non-blocking, argv. And what do we want to do here? So first, I need to take a look at, so I've specified that there should be content for my story that is coupled with the command itself, but then the story could have tags as well. So if there is a tags array or a bunch of tags, then I want to split them by comma. Let's take a look at our tags in here. There we go. So let me just zoom this in. So you can see we have several tags here and all of them are split by comma. Now I need to write that programmatically. If we have tags, we're going to grab our args dot tags, and then we're going to split it at the comma. Now, what if we don't have any tags? Then we're going to pass in an empty array. All right, and this is going to be, this is not args, this is argv. There we go. And I'm going to store this within a variable that's called tags. And let's initialize that as well. There seems to be an error here, and I think that's a comma. That should be a dot. There we go. So we have our tags set up right there. And then let's try to create a new story. So I'm going to say await new story. Let's grab our method. Now this method, remember, what does this function require? It requires our story as well as the tags that it have. So the story is right here. We have argv.story, and then we can pass in our tags in here as well. I want to store this within a variable because I want to return that as well. So I'm going to say const story, and then why do we want to return it? Because once the story is created, we want to show it immediately inside of the terminal as well. So I'm going to say console.log. I'm going to say story added successfully, and then what story was added? It is this current story. Now, this story could have some tags. Remember, we need to add those tags here as well. So right after on this command, so if I just hit enter right here and save, oh, it just goes up again. You can see this yellow parentheses, it ends right here. So on there, I'm just going to add a dot option. You could add tags or you could just choose to skip that. I'm going to say tags, but then I could add an alias. Now, you might not want to type the entire name tags. You could just say -t, and that is going to work. The type of this is going to be string, and there could be a description for this as well. So description, and this is going to say tags to add to your story. And there we go. Now, is our command done? No. Why is it not done? let's jump into our index.js. So we created our command, but we need our trigger for our execution as well as input validation. So we need our demand command as well as the parse. Let me come right here. Let's remove this last one. Let's say demand command. And what is the least number of commands that we want to demand? That's 1. And then we need to say parse. And if there are any errors, we are going to fix that. Now, so far, we are just creating a story. We do not provide a more streamlined way of taking a look at this story. But for now, let's just go ahead and let's run this. So what is our CLI? It is Storyfy. What is our command? It's new. And then what is the type of the story? It's right here. Now, I just remembered something. I'm going to get rid of this. I talked about these descriptions that I've written here. So I have a describe here. I have a description right here for my command. Where are they shown? So if you want to take a look at the help for our CLI, you're going to say Storyfy -- help. And this is going to show all of the commands for our CLI. Sorry, that's just a typo. It's Storyfy. Let's hit enter. Did you mean to import? Cannot find. Storyfy. Where is this error coming from? Did you mean to import db.json? Stories.js? db.js. Let's add that. Let's run this again. If there is any other error, we're going to fix that. It says demand command from yargs does not provide a demand command. Demand command. This comes from our command.js. So if I come right here, we have a demand on the option. Yargs, that should work. We have our option. Let me see. So command.js, import yargs from yargs. The request of my yarg then provide an export named demand command. Even though we looked at it here. Maybe there is something else. So let me just collapse that, collapse the option. The position of this is okay. Its position is okay. The requested module demand command. It should be available globally on the yargs. So we imported yargs. Why did we import demand command? We shouldn't import this. It's available on the yargs. We don't have to import it. So let's run this again, help. And now there is another error. It says import new story from stories. The requested module does not provide an export. Let's come to our stories. Yep, we did not export this. So let's say export, save this. And now we should, let me just clear the terminal. Let's run this again. And there we go. It works finally. So the things that we have written within our command, it's right here. So our CLI, how many commands does it have currently? It just has one command. And what does that command map to? To which file? It maps to our index.js file. Let me just show it to you like this. So it maps to this file. What is the actual command? The command is new. Now, does it have a positional argument that is required? Yes, it does have it. But what is the description for this command? It says create new story, which comes from here. Now, what about these options that we have provided for this? Where are they? So to be able to get to take a look at these options, what you need to do is you need to run a different command. So you need to take a look at the help for that specific command. So you're going to say Storyfy. What is the command that you want to take a look at help for? It's new, and then -- help. And as soon as I hit enter, there we go. So this command, this is the command. This is a description for the command. It has positionals, which is called story. This is the description for that. Let me show it to you better. So this is the description for it. It has a type of string. And remember, what did I say? It's required. There we go. So these are the idea behind these descriptions are whenever you want to create a CLI that is helpful and you want to take a look at the help for your CLI, you can do it like this. All right, so now that we know all of this, why don't we go ahead and create something something inside of our database? So I'm going to call, say, Storyfy new, and this is a new story. I could add some tags, but for now, I'm just going to hit enter. And there we go. Congratulations. We didn't have any errors, and that's very good. Now, you can see it says story added successfully. Where does this come from? It comes from this log that we added. And then we log the story right in front of it. You could say it's readable, but we can certainly do better than this in the readability department. But first we need to see what it is that we have done here. So we have the tags, which is an empty array because we didn't provide any tags. We have the content that says this is a new story, and then we have the ID, which is the time that this story was created. Now, if you want to improve on the readability of this story, you could just bring this down, and I'm going to go on top of here. I'm going to say const list stories. This method is just going to be able to show our stories better. So we are going to grab all of our stories, and we want to map over our stories because remember, stories is actually an array. We want to map over our stories, or we could use the for each method. I haven't used this in such a long time. So the element is going to be story, individual story. Now, what do we want to do here? First off, I want to create console.log. I want to add a new line whenever I create a new story. So it's going to be new line. There we go. And then let's take a look at our completed stories. That's the new line. You can see the space that I have right here. That's the new line. So the first thing that I show is the date created. Then I show the ID. I show the tags. And then I show the story itself. Okay, so let's go in that order. Of course, feel free to change it if you want to. Just change it. We're going to say date created. Remember, we're going to use the ID for this one. So I'm going to say new date. I'm going to convert it to a new date. What do I want to convert? That's this number. And then I'm going to say dot to local string. And that's going to make it readable for us. Log. What do I want to do after that? Now I could, you know what? Let's show the ID. Why not? I could go uppercase for this. And this is going to be story.id. This should be within the quote. We have comma story.id. After the ID, I want to show the tags for the story. And it's going to be, now if we have some tags, we are going to show it. Otherwise, we want to show an empty array. So here I want to say story.tags, otherwise an empty array. Now, whatever happens, we want to join it at the comma. All right. Now, we did this once because we want to store it within our database, but we do it again because we want to show it inside of the terminal. So if you take a look at this, now we don't have any tags. I'm going to create a new story and I'm going to add tags. And so we can take a look at that better. But for now, let's just complete this. And finally, we want to show the content of the story. So we could say story content. That's going to be story.content. Save this. And now that this is done, we need to pass in, we need to call this list stories somewhere, and we need to pass in this method in there. So I'm going to create a new command right after the options. Let's create, let's hit enter.command. Now, what is going to be the command? Now, since you know the first command, the rest of the commands is going to be extremely simple. That was the most difficult of them. So there is going to be a command that's called all. What is the job of this command? It's going to be able to get all stories. And does it have any builder function? It's not going to have anything, but I'm still going to pass in the signature for the builder function. What about the handler function? Yes, it will have a handler function in which we get our argv or our arguments array. And what do we want to do in here? So within here, we want to select all of our stories. So there should be a method that's going to be called, you could call it get all stories. And we are going to await this because we want this to not block our application. And it's going to get all of our stories for us. We are yet to create this method. We are going to create it. And then I'm going to grab my list stories and I'm going to pass in the stories that we get from here. Now, where do we actually create this? Let's just copy the name of this. I am going to jump into, let's close the index. Let's jump into here. I'm going to come right here. I'm going to say export const get all stories. Now, if we want to get all the stories, the only thing we need to do is interact with our database, right? But this interaction is going to be asynchronous, remember? So how do we interact with our database? We're going to say await get db. This is going to get all of the entries from our database. And once we get that, we store it, we store it within this variable. And then from this variable, we return all of our stories. Save this. Should be done here. Let's import this method. Let me just copy this, come to the top, comma, add that, and we should be good to go. So I'm going to create a new story. I'm going to say this is a new story. This is a second story that has tags. And now the way you can create tags is you could say -- tags. And then you need to add tags in here. So it could be story, new, and then test. You could do this -- tags, or you could say -- t. I'm just going to say tags for now, and I'm going to hit enter. And there we go. We have our array of story, new, and test. This is a second story that has tags. We have some ID for it as well. And now if we run our command story, Storyfy, and what is the command? So CLI Storyfy, the command is all. As soon as I hit enter, there we go. It just got all of my stories. And this is really, really interesting. If we take a look at our database, we can see we have all of our tags in here as well. And this is looking perfectly fine. We have the story, we have the new, and then we have the test. And again, please don't make any changes in here. Just if you want to make any changes, create a method for it and then combine it with the command that you want. All right. This command, it doesn't have to be all. You could say get all stories, and that would be better. That would work as well. Now, if I take a look at my Storyfy, help, hit enter. Before we just had one command. You can see it says commands here, and now we have two commands. So the first one was new story. The second one doesn't have a required positional argument. That's why the place of that is empty. But the description says get all stories. The next command that I want to talk about is the ability for us to be able to get one story from our database. And let me just collapse these commands. Let's collapse this one, collapse this one. Did I just collapse that? There we go. Collapsed all three of them. So the next command, this is the method. So what do you want it to be called? I'm just going to say find. Now, we want to be able to find a story based on its ID. So the user has to provide the story ID in order for us to be able to find it, right? So there must be a positional argument. I'm going to call that ID. I'm going to give it some description. I'm going to say the ID to, I'm going to say an ID or ID to find a not find a story. I could say ID to find a story. Yeah. By, should I add by? No, not needed. So we're going to have some builder function that basically is going to add more information for our positional argument. Let's grab our yargs. Now, what do we want to do in here? So we want this function to basically return yargs dot positional, because this is actually a positional argument. What did we call it? We called it ID. And how do we want to add more information for it? If we want that information to be found within the help. Now, I just noticed something. This is the description that I want to be added here. But for this one, this is the description for the command, right? And for this description, I'm going to say get matching story. Now keep in mind, at any point in time, we're going to have one ID, one specific ID per one story. No two stories will have the same ID because it's going to take some time for the IDs to be created. And the IDs are basically timestamps. So the seconds and milliseconds, they're going to basically elapse. And so the ID is going to be different for the stories. Now, what should be the type of the ID? Well, we know that the type of the ID is a number. So I'm just going to pass in number in there. Now with this, our basically our builder function comes to an end. Let's create our handler function. We want this process to be asynchronous because this is going to take some time. Let's grab argv. Now, we need to have some sort of a method within our stories.js that's going to handle this operation for us. I'm going to call that find stories, and I'm going to pass in an ID in there. Now, the ID that I pass in here as an argument to this find stories, this is the ID that I've passed in, that I've written within the terminal, because this is coupled with the command. So I pass in an ID, I cross-reference it with the database. If it is a match, I return that. Basically, I found the story. So it's going to be RGV. This is going to be an asynchronous process. Await, come on, await, and provide a space. I'm going to save this within a variable. I could call it target story. And what do I want to do next? Basically, I have a function that's called list stories that is going to be responsible for formatting the story in a better way so I can read it better. Now, we need to create this find stories, and I'm going to import it, even though we have not created that. I'm just going to import it, and I'm going to come right here, and we are going to create it. So it's going to be export const find stories. And is this going to be an asynchronous function? Yes, this is going to be because it's going to take some time and we don't want our application to freeze. Now, the ID that I pass in as a parameter here, that's basically the argument that this function has received. And the argument comes from the terminal. Now, I have basically passed in an ID that this function has received, and I want to cross-reference it with my database, with all of the entries. So I have this method that we created right here, get all stories. And this is going to give us all of the stories from the database. We could store it within this variable and we could call it const, and then we can cross-reference it. And if the ID matches, we return it. And that would mean that we have found our target story. So I'm going to say return stories.filter. We take a look at every individual story, and if the individual story ID matches the ID that I've written inside of the terminal, we return that story. And that should be it. So I'm going to say clear Storyfy find, and let's come right here. I'm going to select that, put it right here, and I'm going to hit enter, and there we go. We found our story. We could take a look at this as well. Let's copy the ID. So we are finding the stories based on IDs. And this is the other story. Now you could have found the stories based on their tags, but sometimes some stories might have overlapping tags. So you might end up with two stories being fetched. And you could find stories by content, but then the issue with that is if there is like a longer content for a specific story, like this one, you should make sure that all the punctuation and the spaces and everything matches. Otherwise, the story is not going to be retrieved. But working with ID, seeing that this is like a sequence of numbers, that's very, very easy for us. And it's unique to stories as well, unique to every individual story. So that's the other command. The next command that I want to create is to be able to delete one story. And for this one, we could just say delete. Now, if I want to delete one story, which story is that? Well, I need to pass in the ID inside the terminal. So you can see, what did we do here? I said story find, and then I passed in the ID of a specific story that I want to take a look at. And the delete is going to work like this, but instead of find, we are going to say delete. And we pass in the ID of the story that we want to delete. And now, remember, once we delete the story, it's no longer inside of our database. So it's not like find. Once I hit enter, I'm not going to see the story anymore because I just deleted that. Okay. Now, what do I pass in here? This is going to be this is going to need a positional argument. That's going to be an ID because we need to make sure which story it is that we want to delete. Now, I'm going to add in some description for our for our command as well. That's going to be delete a story by ID. All right, let's grab our builder function, return yargs dot positional. What is the positional argument? It's ID. Let's add a little bit of description for it. So describe, this is going to be the ID of story you want to delete. Let me take a look at our previous command. I think this is better, right? So let me just pass that here as well. You want to find the ID of the story you want to find because it's obvious which story it is. Okay, and what is going to be the type? Type of this is going to be number. All right, we need to have our handler function here as well, argv, and much like before, we need to create a method that's gonna be responsible for deleting or removing a story. I'm gonna say await delete story. I call this find stories because we are finding one story, and this is saying find stories. So I'm going to say find story. Let's just copy that, put it right here, and put it right here. Save this, and this should be delete story. Now, if we wanted to be able to delete a story, we need to pass in the ID. And again, the argv.id argument that I pass into this delete story, this is the ID that I've passed in inside of the terminal. And whatever story that has been deleted, I'm going to call it target story. Now, once the story is deleted, as I said, there is nothing for me to show inside of the terminal. So instead of showing anything, I'm just going to say, I'm just going to pass in a string. So if the target story was a match and we deleted that, I'm going to say story deleted successfully. Otherwise, if the ID for that specific story is not there, or we have inserted an ID that doesn't match, we're going to say story not found. Let's save this. Now we need to create this, and we need to import it here as well. So I'm going to import it first, and then I'm going to come right here and I'm going to say export const delete story. This is going to be an async operation. Now, if we want to delete a story, the story should have an ID that we passed in inside of the terminal. That's this ID that I've written. And I need to highlight this because this is very important. So this ID that this delete story function accepts as a parameter, this is the ID that I've passed in inside of the terminal. And this is the ID of the story that I want to delete, much like this ID, which was the ID of the story that I wanted to find. Now, what do I want to do here? Now, before moving forward, we need to talk about what it is that we want to do here. Now, we don't want to delete anything from our database. We're going to go in some other way. So the way that I'm going to go about this is our database is actually an array, right? And this array, arrays have a lot of methods in JavaScript. And since Node.js is JavaScript, I could leverage those methods. So what I can do is I have two stories here, and I want one of the stories to be deleted. Let's say this 4477, the story with this ID, I want this to be deleted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new array, and inside of that new array, I am going to only pass in the stories whose IDs do not end with 4477. And in the process, I have deleted this. All right, I hope you're getting the point. So we are basically changing the stories array. We add another array here instead of this one, a new array. But in that new array, we do not return this ID. And effectively, we will have deleted that. Because the reason that I'm going about it this way is because we have methods that do this thing in JavaScript. But first, let's get all of our stories. We have this get all stories method that we created above right here. So here is the get all stories method. We have that. And this is going to give us all of these stories. Let's put it right here. Now, let's first take a look at if there is a match. We're going to say match. Now, I'm going to say stories.find. We're going to take a look at every individual story. We don't need parentheses for this one. And if the story.id is equal to the ID that I have passed in within the terminal, that means there is a match. And that means I have found the story that I want to delete. Now, if I have found that story that I want to delete, what do? I create a new array, and I return all the stories whose IDs do not match. Why? Because the one that matches, I want to delete it. I want to delete that. So why should I return it? I return all the other ones. So if you want to delete one file from your computer, do you delete all the other ones as well? No, you just delete that specific file, and then you keep all the other files that do not match your target file. And that's exactly what we do here. So I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it new stories. And this is going to hold the new array for us. How do you create a new array? Well, this filter method is going to do that for us. So I'm going to grab the stories whose IDs do not match. Because if it is a match, I don't want to return it. I want it to go away. So I just keep the ones that match, that do not match. Sorry. I just keep the ones that do not match. And now this process is going to be async because I need to save my database. It's going to take a few milliseconds. What do I want to save it with? I want to find the string stories. I want to set its value to this new stories array. This should be an object. There we go. Perfect. And we could return the ID as well. Okay, so far so good. I hope everything is making sense. And I'm going to explain this one more time here as well. So I am trying to delete this story. So the way that I'm deleting it is I create a new array. Let me just zoom this out a little bit. So this is one array. This array has two objects. I create a new array and I take a look at all of these items that are within the old array. And I find the one ID for a story that I want to delete. So within the new array, it's like this. So take a look at it like this. Copy that, put it right here. I know there's going to be like errors, but so this is going to be a new array for me, but this is the ID that matched. So I do not return it within my new array. And what did I do essentially? I had this old array, I converted it to a new array, and that item doesn't exist. So effectively, I deleted that. See, very simple, right? So in here, I'm going to say, let's zoom this in. Storyfy delete 4477. Let's pass that here. As soon as I hit enter, the story is gone. It's basically, again, we create a new array and we only pass in the stories whose IDs do not match. Because if it is a match, we delete it. Now, what if I run this command again? Because there is no story that has an ID 4477. So it says story not found. Very cool stuff, right? So this is if you wanted to delete one individual story. Now, what if you want to delete the entire database? Let's say Storyfy new. I'm going to just hit this several times. And I know all of the tags and the content are the same, but the ID, you can see the ID is different, even though I was very quick, but the ID is always going to be different. So I have several entries in here. What if I want to delete all of them at the same time? Now, the command for this is going to go like this. I'm going to ask you a question. Do I need a positional argument? Do I need some sort of an ID for a specific story or not? I don't need it because I am deleting all of them. I'm not like choosing and picking. No, I'm deleting all of them. And I could call this command delete all, but I think this is a mouthful. I could call it delete all. It's a little bit difficult to read. I could just call it clean. What is this command going to do for me? This is going to remove or delete all stories from DB. Do we need any sort of a builder function? We don't, because we don't have any positional argument. We don't have any information regarding any more information regarding what we want to do. We just want to clear our database. So I'm going to pass in argv. Now remember, we need to create a method that's going to clear everything. Now, when I clear everything, do I have anything remaining in my database? I don't. So there is no point for me to store this function in anywhere. And we did that here. So we deleted a specific story, and then we stored that inside the target story, and we return that. Now, once we delete everything, we don't have anything to store in a variable. Now, what do you want to call this? I could call it delete all stories or clear DB. Now, if I say clear DB, this is going to look like a database abstraction method, which is going to be a little bit confusing. That what is this doing inside of my commands? So we should go with a simpler name, delete all stories. Now you can see naming these is extremely important. Now, once all the stories are deleted, I could show a simple string. I could say log all stories have been deleted. All stories have been deleted. Now, let's get this. I'm going to import it here first. Put that, and let's define this. So I have export const delete all stories. Now, this process could be asynchronous or it could be synchronous. And the reason for it is because there is nothing that comes after this. So even if it blocks our application for a few milliseconds, there shouldn't be any worries because we don't have anything after this. But I'm going to show you both scenarios. Now, how do we want to implement this? Well, the easier way for us to implement this is to just replace this array as we did before. So I have an array, and this array could have 5 items. It could have 5,000 items. I don't care. I just replace this array with an empty array, and I save it to my database. So I'm going to say, and we already have this save DB. Within the save DB, I'm going to grab my stories string, and I'm just going to say, okay, now you are an empty array. And that's it. So if I come right here, if I collapse everything, we are essentially swapping this array with an empty array. And in the process, we delete everything. Storyfy, clean, hit enter. All stories have been deleted. Let's fix the text. Deleted have been. And there we go. So even if I were to, now if I do a Control Z in here, you can see all the stories come back. Please don't do this. Do not manipulate your database directly. But this is just easier. You know what? I'm not going to go this way. Let me just clean everything first. Everything is cleaned. Now I'm going to do this. So I have a lot of items. Do not manipulate your database. You're going to get into a lot of trouble. So let's get rid of our asynchronous function. This should still work. Let me hit that. There we go. So we have a lot of entries, as you can see in the preview. I'm going to say Storyfy clean. Enter. And I just cleared everything. Now, because I want all of the function signatures to be consistent, I'm going to add our asynchronous here. Now, we are effectively done with this CLI app. And you can hit the brakes here, pat yourselves on the back, and you did a great thing. You created a great application, CLI app. Now, what I want to do next is I want to take it one step further. I want to add another command that is basically going to feed all of these server-side HTML to a front end. I want to show you how to create a server in Node.js as well. So let's go ahead and let's do that. I'm going to close this stories.js. We're not going to need it. Let's collapse our commands so it's easier for us to navigate this file. Close the db.js as well. Clear the terminal. And I'm going to bring it down. Very good. let's open up our server.js, and now I'm going to get started by creating a server. Now, first things first, you could do everything that I'm about to do here with Express.js, which is a backend framework for Node.js that helps us basically create servers a lot easier and more efficiently. But what I want to do is, because this is a beginner level video for beginners who just want to get started with Node.js, I don't want to use Express. I want to go with vanilla Node.js. Now, the relationship that Express has with Node.js is almost the same relationship. I have air quotes, so I have quotes. You don't see them, but I'm air quoting. It's the same relationship that React has with JavaScript. So JavaScript can do almost everything React does, but if you use React, the process of creating UIs is going to be smoother. Now, Node.js, of course, can do everything Express does, but if you use Express, the process of creating servers and sending responses is going to be easier. But you need to understand how vanilla works. As if you want to learn React, you need to understand how JavaScript works. If you want to learn Express, you need to know how you can create a server, a simple one, just a simple server, not too complicated. In Node.js. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is going to be a little bit different. I want to import some stuff and I want to explain this. Now, what do we want to do inside of our server.js file? So in here, we want to basically create an HTTP server. We want to render stories into HTML using a template. I'm going to explain what that is. We want to start a server on a specified port, and then we want to be able to open up the browser to view the result. So we want to do basically 4 things. And let's get started. So now we want to make some changes to a specific file. That's why we're going to use the FS module, the file system module from Node. But I want this to be asynchronous. So I'm going to use the promises version. Promises. And to which file do we want to make changes? It's this template.html. So far it's currently empty. We want to put all of the stories using our server. We want to put all of them inside of this template, but we want to do it in a server-side manner. So all of the stories are server rendered. Nothing comes from the front end. Everything goes from the back end to the front end. That's what we want to do. So here I'm going to say import. The next thing that I want to import is the ability for us to create an HTTP server. So it's going to be HTTP from Node, HTTP. And finally, I want to import. Now, I have not installed this package, but I'm going to import it and then I'm going to install it. This is the open package. And this or library, this is going to allow us to open up the browser automatically. So let's go ahead and let's install it. We're going to say npm I. I want to install it as a development dependency. So I'm just going to say -d and I'm going to say open. Let's hit enter. Let's take a look at our package.json. Now we have a different entry that is basically a development dependency entry here, right here. All right. And I've already talked a lot about this. So these are the things that I want to import here. Now, the first thing that I want to do here is I want to jump into my HTML, the next thing basically. And I want to create a simple HTML boilerplate. And let me give it a title. Stories CLI App. That's enough. In the head part, there is going to be a style tag in which I'm just going to replace the style tag. These are the styles that I've implemented on these stories. I've experimented with them. That's why there is like a couple of them that are commented out. So this is CSS. The reason for this is once we receive stories from the server to the front end, they're going to look horrible. we want them to have some style. So I'm just going to collapse that. Now, what do we want to do in the body? In the body, I want to create an H1 that's going to say Node CLI App. And then I want all the stories to be within this main element. This main element is going to have a class. It's going to be Stories container. The class is used to style this main element. Now, what we want to do within our server.js is we want to mimic the behavior of a template engine. A template engine's job is to send some HTML from the server to the front end. And we put all of the HTML, we need to specify where we want to put all the HTML. Now, I want to put all of the HTML within this main element, right here, within here, okay? Now, how do you put that? Now, if you have any prior knowledge of any other backend framework like Flask or Django or whatever, you might have seen something like this. So you have double quotes, and then you need to pass in some sort of a placeholder that we are going to replace with all of the stories that we receive from the backend. And I'm going to call this placeholder stories. Now, again, this is the reason behind this is that we want all of the stories that come from the server. If we want to show them in the browser, they should be placed somewhere, and they're going to be placed within this template. The reason that it's called a template is because this is not pure HTML. It looks like HTML, but it is not pure HTML. It comes from the server, so it's server-side HTML, but the browser is still able to actually show that. And that's why the name of this file is also a template. It's not index.html. It's a template for an HTML file. Nonetheless, it looks like an HTML file for us, and that's why the browser can handle that. Now, why double quotes? Because that's the common convention for showing or displaying template HTML. We use double quotes, right? And now that I've used double quotes, I need to understand this pattern, because once I receive the HTML from the server and I put it here, I want to make sure that the HTML is put right here, and they replace the stories string or whatever this is. I don't want all of the HTML to come within my H1 or to go outside of the main element. I want it to be interpolated directly within my main element. So I need to tell my server where the HTML should go. Otherwise, it doesn't know where it should go. And that's why we are going to create a function that is called const interpolate. This function, interpolate, this function is going to have two parameters. One is going to be our HTML, and the other one is going to be the data that we pass into that HTML. All right, now what do we want to return from this function? We want to return dot replace. Now, replace is a method that supports regular expression patterns. Now, I said I want the HTML to come directly in here. So I need to tell my server to put it directly in here. And how do I tell it? Well, one way for us is to use regular expressions. So how does regular expressions of JavaScript help us in this scenario? Well, I can say specifically, if you see this pattern, and what is this pattern? This pattern has one curly brace here, the other one is here, and then we have some sort of a text in between. There could be spaces on either side of that text, all right? Now keep in mind, this is word characters, right? And then I have another curly brace here and another curly brace here. I tell my server, my template engine, that once you see this pattern, put all of the HTML from the server inside of this pattern. Just replace it with this. This pattern is a placeholder. All right. Now, now when our server sees this HTML, it's not going to replace it with this H1 because it doesn't match that regular expression pattern. Regular expressions are really, really powerful, and that's why I'm using it here. This could be as a practice activity for you as well. So what is the pattern that we want to take a look at? So here we have one curly brace, another curly brace, and then within there we have stories. Now, you could call this string stories, or you could call it whatever you want. So instead of saying that this is stories, let me zoom this in. I'm just going to say a sequence of words. How do you specify a sequence of words? You're going to say \w, and I'm going to pass in plus because there could be one character or more. Now, stories has several letters, right? That's why I'm going to pass in w. Now, on either side of this parenthesis, I could have a space. How do I denote that? This is going to be a space. Now that space could be one or more, so I'm going to pass in an asterisk. Let me copy this and put it on the other side of the word. Now keep in mind there should not be any space in between this regular expression. Now, I have this curly brace and I need to escape it, so I'm going to pass in one backslash in there, and I have this curly brace that I need to escape. I'm talking about this one. So I need to pass in a backslash before that as well. So let's just pass it in there. So far everything is making sense. But what happened to the backslashes for these ones? So for the outer curly brace, this is the backslash. For the inner one, this is the backslash. Now I need to wrap this around with a set of forward slashes. So I'm going to pass in a forward slash in there, and I'm going to pass in one in there, and I'm going to put in the G, and now it works. And the reason that we do this is because you need to specify that you're searching. So this G, this basically means a global search. Find all occurrences inside of our string. And now you know what this regular expression is. Now, we are going to pass in a match, and I'm going to tell you what this match is, and then we're going to pass in something called a placeholder. So the job of the match is to find the string. The job of the placeholder is to replace it with the data that we receive from our database. Now, what do we want to do here is we want to say return data placeholder. We want to return a placeholder as the data for our HTML. Now, what if we don't have anything? Should we show undefined inside of HTML, which is going to break our template, or we could just show an empty string? We don't have anything on the server, so there you go, empty string. Instead of breaking our HTML, we just show an empty string. All right, so you could say this is the most difficult part of creating the server, but let's just move forward and let's see what else we need to do. So this is the interpolate function. This is not a server. The job of this is just find this pattern, and once you find it, you replace it with the placeholder that comes from data. Otherwise, you just pass in an empty string. Where is our server? Let's go ahead and let's create our server. So I'm just going to call it a very on-the-nose name, that is create server. Now, this server should receive all of the stories from the database, and it should return an HTTP server for us. Now, we have this HTTP package. On there, we have a lot of stuff. One of those is called create server. Now, since you are creating a server, this is going to be an asynchronous process. And when you create a server, there are two main things involved in there. One is request that comes from the front end, and another one is res or response that goes from the back end to the front end. So when the server receives a request, it finds a response for it, it formulates a response, and it sends the response back to the front end. So the server receives a request, but the server sends a response. Now, in here, let's go ahead and let's find our HTML. Where is our HTML file? And we have already done this. So I'm going to say HTML underscore path. Now, since we are using ES modules, we don't have underscore dir name. We have this new URL. And where is our template? It is in the same directory as our server.js. So I'm just going to say template.html. And then we need to read it. So I'm going to say import.url.meta.url. I've already explained all of this, how this works. This import.meta.url is basically going to resolve this template.html as an absolute import, not as a relative import for us. Now that we have selected our HTML, let's create a template as well. I'm going to say await. Since this is going to take some time, I'm going to say fs.read file. We want to read all the contents of the file. Why? Because we're looking for this pattern, for which we created a regular expression. So we read the file. Which file? The file that has an HTML underscore path, but make sure you pass in a UTF-8 for character encoding, because we want to read it as a string. All right. And then once we read it, we have another variable here in which we call our interpolate function. Now, we pass in the template. Now keep in mind, interpolate function accepts two things. It accepts our HTML, which is now stored within this template because we read it. And then once we read it, we take a look at this pattern and we replace it with the data that we get from the db.json. And we are going to get to that point. Don't worry about it. Now, what is the data? Where is the data coming from? Well, remember, it is an object that has an array. Now, I could pass in stories here directly, but then it's not going to be readable. It's all going to be mushed when we get to our front end. So I'm going to create a different method and I'm going to call it format stories. And then I'm going to pass in my stories in there. So the format stories job is to basically format our stories in the form of HTML elements so they're more readable. Now, if you take a look at that here, open this up, you can see we have section elements for all of our stories. We have an h2 and then we have a div for all of our tags. Now, my HTML that I have, the completed project, it doesn't have all of this. They come from the server. Our HTML, you can see it doesn't have anything. They're going to come from the server. We read this file, we found this pattern, and then we are going to populate this pattern with our stories. But before populating that, we are going to format them as well. Now, since this is an HTTP server, we need to include a header for our response. So I'm going to say write head. The status is going to be 200. I'm going to explain why we need this header. And then we need to specify a content type as well. So this is going to be this string content type. What is the content type? It's equal to text /HTML. Now, the reason that we need headers is because we want to tell the browsers how to handle the response. And we need to confirm that this response was successful. That's why we provide it with a status code of 200. And there were a couple of other reasons that are a little bit more advanced that I don't want to get into. And then we need to also specify what it is that we sent. We sent an HTML response. So you need to format it as though this is real HTML. And finally, we need to end the response. So the cycle ends somewhere. And I'm going to say end, and I'm going to pass in the HTML. This is going to send the final HTML to the client, and this is going to end the response. So this is our server. We effectively created our server. Now, I want to start the browser as well using that library, that open library that we installed. So I'm going to export this start method, because this start method is going to be the method that we're going to use inside of our command. Now keep in mind, at the end of the day, we want to run a command inside of our terminal, and that command is going to open up the browser, and it's going to fetch all the data from our database using the server, and it's going to send it to our front end to that browser. That's what we want to do. So this is going to accept stories. Now, since this start method is going to be the method that we are going to send to our command, this is going to accept all of our stories. You might have had this question. Okay, this stories that we fetch from database, we didn't actually call this. Where is this coming from? This is coming from our start, and all the pieces are going to come together. Now, there is going to be a port needed as well. So that port, I want to put it inside of my command as well. Now, let's say server is equal to create server, and I'm going to pass in the stories in here. So we called our create server function, and we passed in the stories in there. Now, how do we listen for an incoming port? We are going to say server.listen. This is basically going to start the server on a given port. And I'm going to just bear with me. You're going to understand what this is. The port, as I said, it is going to come from the command. You could name the port any number you want. And then once the port is ready, I want to run a method. I want to run a string inside of the terminal just to show that the server is actually working. So I'm going to say server is listening on port. Okay, this should be backticks because I'm trying to do a template literal. Whoops, a template string here, and this is going to be the port. This message, whenever you see this message, it means our server is running. Now, once the server is running, we're going to grab our open library that we installed, and we want this open to open the browser automatically for us. The server is going to go on HTTP localhost, but what is going to be the port? Well, it depends on what I want to specify inside of my command. And the only thing remaining here is to show this format stories to create that function as well. Remember, we did not actually create that. So I'm going to say const format stories. This is going to accept stories, and then it is going to return some HTML. So it's going to return stories. Now, stories is an array. So as soon as I do dot, I should be able to access them using the map method. Now, for every individual story, we want to create some HTML, as you saw here. So you can see every individual story has some HTML, and it's the same HTML. So the HTML structure is the same. Now, what kind of a structure do I want to create here? I'm going to say return. Now, since there is going to be several lines, the best quotations or quotes or creating a variable is going to be these backticks, because we want to work with several lines. Now, here is where I'm going to create some HTML. Now, I'm going to use the article element of HTML. You know what? This is going to take some time, so I'm just going to copy paste what I created here. But in my completed application, I have this section. Let me just indent this. I have this section element, but I feel like for stories, this should be article element. So we have an article element that has a class of story. Within there, we have an h2 that has a class of story title. These classes are necessary for styling. with CSS. And then this H2 is going to show the story.content. Why aren't we hard coding? Because we might have 1,000 stories and they will have different content. So you need to select that programmatically. And this story, this is the story that we got from our database. So every individual story that we get, we put the content here, we sift through the tags. Now, why are we mapping over the tags? Because tags, we don't have any stories. So let me create. Because tags is also an array. That's why we can filter through, we can map through it. We can map through it, and every time we map, we generate a paragraph element. And the content is the text of that tag. And then we join these paragraphs by an empty string. And that's it. So this is our server-side HTML. Now you can see, since this HTML is on the server, I don't have any autocomplete, I don't have any highlighting, I have nothing. Now, I'm going to add a new line to this just for better formatting. There we go. We should be effectively done with our server. We need to create the command for this one as well. And the job of the command is basically to run this. So what is going to be the command? Let's come right here, command. You could call this command whatever you want. I'm going to say web. Now, this is going to need a port. Now, so far what we did was we had angle brackets. Angle brackets mean a required positional argument. Square brackets mean an optional positional argument. Now, this port, it could be something that you provide, or it could be something that you don't provide. And what is this port? Take a look at that here. Let me show it to you. Oops. So this 5,000, that's the port on which this website is live, 5,000. So any website local, you need to have some sort of a port if you want to see it in the browser. See? Okay, so that port, it's optional. What is the job of this command? To basically launch website, launch the browser to show the stories. Now, we are going to have a builder function here because we need to specify what the port is in case you don't want to write it by hand. So what is the port? It's going to be return yargs. We have done this several times by now. What did we call this? We called it port. Put it within quotes. And we need to provide a little bit more description, right? So we're going to say describe. What is this? This is going to be port to put the port to make the website live. I'm sure we can come up with a better description for it. The default port, now since 5,000 is already selected, I'm going to say 5, I could say 8,000. That's the default. Now, what does this mean, default? It means that if you don't provide a port, the default port that the server is going to select to show our content or our stories is going to be 8,000. The type of this is going to be number. And again, this is going to be an async operation, argv. What do we want to do here? Let's create a variable, put all the stories in there. Now we have a method that's called get all stories that has all of the stories. And now where is our start method? Here is our start function that we created. So I'm going to call the start function. What should I pass in within the start? I should pass in all of my stories in there. Well, I know where they are. They're right here. And then I should pass in the port, argv.port. And that should be it. Let's save this. Now, as soon as I say Storyfy web, let's hit, here we are. So you can see now it's 5,000. I'm going to come right here and I'm going to hit enter. Start is not, oh, because we didn't actually import start from our server. So let's go to top. I'm going to say import start from server.js. Save this, run this again. You can see we just have one story, but because the server is running successfully, we see this message. It says server is listening on port 8000. And where is this port coming from? Well, we passed in the port to our start, and here is the port, which is default 8000. And once we ran our server, see, it says HTTP localhost port 8000. And if I come in here, there we go. That's port 8000 right there. Cool stuff. Now, because we just have this, we only have one story because we just have one story. Now, if you do Control-C, you're going to terminate the server. Let's run it again. And let's say now I want it to be on port 8001. Let's hit enter. Now, you can see it says 8001 because this, if I go to my command, this port is optional. Let me just bring this down. The port is optional. I could provide it in here, and I did, 8001, and that's the port that the server is listening on. Or I could just skip it, and the server is going to take 8000. And you can see this server is listening. It comes from our console log here. And at this point, our application is completed. The only thing you could do is you could basically just populate your database, and you're going to see more and more stories here. Now, for the app that I will be uploading, I will add all of this data because this is just one story. Now, if you want to add more data, just close the server and then Storyfy new. You could run this several times and then run your server again. And there you go. Now you have a lot of stories here. Of course, with much like with any other website of mine, this is going to be responsive as well. That's why I added the styles. See, very cool, right? And that is it for this application. I really enjoyed creating this, and I enjoyed more teaching it. And see you in the next one.